Welcome to Psych 230, Social Psychology. This week, we're going to be going over Chapter 5. We're going to be talking about attitudes and persuasion. Okay, so we are going to talk about all of this stuff. We won't get to everything today, but a lot of it. So why don't we just get started? The nature of attitudes. Let's talk about attitudes, right? I'm not really defining what an attitude is for you guys because I did that for you already in a previous chapter. Remember that an attitude refers to how you feel about something, okay? Maybe you feel that, maybe you dislike politicians, that's an attitude. Or you're against gun control, that's an attitude, right? It says that you feel a certain way about something, about a person, a thing, about an object. That's what an attitude is. We defined that already, so I'm just reminding you guys. But where do our attitudes come from? Okay, attitudes come from different sources. Okay, your attitudes can come from classical conditioning. If you remember classical conditioning from Psych 101, that is learning through association. So a lot of people, for instance, dislike hospitals. Why? Because hospitals are associated with things we don't like. Hospitals are associated with disease and pain and vaccinations, shots, and things like that. Death, they're associated with all those things. So they're associated with negative things. So therefore, most of us do not like hospitals. Okay. That's one source of attitudes. Classical conditioning, it's a form of learning. Another source of attitudes, another place you can get your attitudes is from operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is another form of learning. It's a form of learning where you learn through rewards and punishments. So maybe you like designer clothes, right? You have that attitude. You love designer clothes, or maybe you love a particular brand, right? That's an attitude. Okay, why? Well, one reason would be is that when you wear those kind of clothes, it gets you lots of attention. People comment on what a pretty dress you're wearing, or what a cool outfit that is, or whatever it is, right? So you've been rewarded for that, and therefore you like those clothes. You like that brand, for instance. That is operant conditioning. That is learning through rewards and punishments. You can also learn, for instance, to dislike policemen, let's say, because the police punish you. Whenever they pull you over, it's because they're giving you a ticket. They're going to arrest you. They're going to do something to you you're not going to like. Okay. So police are usually associated with punishment of some kind, or even worse things for some people. And that's why a lot of people don't like policemen. Okay. There are some people who do like policemen, by the way. And those are usually people who are treated better by policemen, just to make that point, okay? There's a reason why people of color do not like police as much as people who are not of color. People are treated differently by the police. So for most people, at least people I know, right? Most people, usually when you encounter the police, it's because they're going to bust you for something, right? They're going to punish you for something. You're getting a ticket. They're pulling you over, something like that, right? They're usually not just stopping by to say hi, okay? So most people dislike police for that reason. That is operant conditioning. You're learning through a reward or a punishment. In this case, it's a punishment. If the police were to pull you over and they just wanted to say hi and and tell you to have a nice day, you would probably like policemen. And in some places, yeah, that you're probably likely to get that from policemen. Certain neighborhoods, certain places, other parts of the country where certain kinds of people live who are more likely to be treated nicely by police. By the way, if you're rich, yeah, police are more likely to treat you like that. If you're, for instance, let me give you an extreme example. If you're a celebrity, right? Even if you're a person of color, when you're a celebrity, right? You are there driving down the neighborhood, right, in your Ferrari, and you get pulled over. Maybe you're black, maybe you're Latino, maybe you're white, Asian, whatever, male, female. They pull you over, right? And then, the police pull you over and they realize, hey, man, you're Chris Rock. Hey, how's it going? And they tell you, oh, did you know you were going a little bit fast? Yeah, I understand, officer. Well, just thought I'd let you know. Have a nice day, right? That's what's more likely to happen when you're a celebrity. That kind of thing. More likely to let you go, right? They're also more likely to let you go, by the way, when you're white. Okay, it's just part of the thing. But for most of us, for most people, right, who are poor, people of color, stuff like that, people are usually not treated that way by police. So most people dislike police. As a matter of fact, so much so that I can tell you that if you have family members who are policemen or policewomen and you have a party and people are having a good time, when those people show up, when your family members show up who everybody knows, they're policemen and policewomen, it's like big buzzkill for the party, right? I know that because I've talked to people about that who have family members who are policemen, and like her brother showed up and they're policemen. They're not even dressed as policemen, but they know her brothers are policemen, and they show up. It's like all of a sudden everybody's expression on their face changes. Nobody's having fun anymore, right? That's what happens with police for most people. They're associated with punishment, so most people don't like policemen. Okay, learning through rewards and punishments. I gave you both examples, reward and punishment, but most of us get punishment from police. We also learn our attitudes from observational learning. Okay, we learn by watching others. Maybe you vote Republican. Maybe you like Trump or whatever it is. I shouldn't have mentioned Trump, but he does come up later on again. But anyway, maybe you vote Republican because your dad does so, your mom does so, you're brought up in that kind of household. Maybe it's a military household where they vote Republican. Maybe you're more conservative, whatever it is. And Republican is how you vote. That's what your family tells you about things in a certain way, more with that slant, more with that bias, right? And that's what you've learned, and that's how you vote. If you grow up in a Democratic household, right, then you learn different things, you hear different things, and you're likely to vote differently, right? Your attitude is likely to be different. And yes, we're a very divided country, and a lot of it has to do with what we learn, what we hear. People are even hearing different things from different news sources, reporting very different things. But that's all observational learning, whether your dad's telling you, your mom, whether you're watching it from somebody else, whether you're watching it on TV, reading about it, searching the internet, all that is observational learning. And all those things right there, class conditioning, operant conditioning, observational learning, those are the three forms of learning that you should have learned about from Psych 101. Okay, so we learn a lot about our attitudes, but our attitudes are also affected by our heredity, by our biology, our genetics. For instance, if you have a strong sex drive, you're more likely to have a positive attitude toward what, right? I'm recording this, so there's no discussion right now. I'd love to hear your comments, but I guess I'll have to hear them later. But to give you some examples, if you have a strong sex drive, you're more likely to have a positive attitude, for instance, toward pornography, and say that there's nothing wrong with it, that it's okay. If you have a low sex drive, right, then you're more likely to say, no, that's not good, it's bad, you know, blah, 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 whatever it is, right? If you have a strong sex drive, you're more so likely to say it's okay for people to sleep around, more okay for people to have sex when they're not in love, sex before marriage, all those things, right? People who are more horny, so to speak, are more likely to have positive attitudes that correspond with that strong sex drive, okay? It doesn't always match. There are people with strong sex drives who are very opposed to things that are very sexual, but most people, they're consistent for most people. That's where attitudes come from, okay? Let's talk more about these attitudes. Let's talk about attitude strength. First, I'll ask you guys, is it easy to change people's attitudes? How they feel, let's say, about whether they're Democrat, Republican, whether they like this politician or not, whether they like this kind of music or that kind of music, prefer this or that. Like, no, it's not easy to change people's attitudes, just to answer that question. Why? Why not? Well, here's the thing about strong attitudes. Strong attitudes are more likely to remain unchanged. We're less likely to change them. Okay, they're more stable. Strong attitudes better withstand persuasion or appeals. When you try to convince people who have a strong attitude about something, you try to convince them with the opposing side, right, or something else, they are not going to be so easily convinced. Hardly ever will you persuade them. You appeal to them. Like, no, they believe in something strongly, you're not changing their minds. So they're better withstand persuasion appeals. And they're more consistent with behavior. When people have a very strong attitude, their behavior is consistent with that. I'll give you an example. A lot of people say they believe in God, okay? But their behavior is not consistent with that. Most people don't go to church. But those people who have strong attitudes, those people who believe in God strongly, those people who are very religious, right, strongly believe in God, they're there at church, rain or shine, right? Every week. Sometimes they go to church multiple times a week. They have strong attitudes, so their behavior is more likely to be consistent. Another example, right? A lot of you probably say you believe in helping the planet, saving the planet, whatever it is, right? Recycling, that kind of stuff. Does your behavior show it, right? Are you taking care of the planet? Are you recycling? If you have a strong attitude, you're more likely to do that. Here in kind of California, it's kind of mandated, you know, that we're supposed to do that. So most people do that. But let's say other things that would be consistent with believing and taking care of the planet, that kind of, you know, that kind of stuff. Like for instance, not only do you recycle, but let's say, do you keep your cell phone longer for like 5 years or something like that? Do you try not to produce too much electronic waste? You know, a lot of people don't do that. They change phones frequently, creating all this electronic waste. It's very bad. Create all sorts of trash, keep buying product after product from Amazon and, you know, boxes and paper bags and all this stuff that ends up in the trash. Okay. I know because I have a problem in my own household with my wife about this. She just buys tons of stuff. Okay. And most of that will eventually end up in the garbage, almost all of it. And guess what? We're polluting our oceans, the environment. We're causing a lot of wreaking havoc on the planet. If you believe strongly in protecting the environment, if you have a strong attitude, you're less likely to be so materialistic, more likely to recycle, more likely to do things that are better for the planet, right? Believe in green energy, that kind of stuff, right? So just an examples, right? Strong attitudes are more likely to be consistent with behavior. Attitudes that are not so strong, most of us, we're kind of hypocrites half the time. You know, half the time we say we believe one thing and we don't do things that really support that or are not consistent with that. There are reasons why strong attitudes resist change, reasons why it's hard to change people's attitudes, especially when they're strong. One is commitment. When people have strong attitudes, they are certain that they are correct. Someone has a very strong belief in God, they are certain that God exists and that there is a heaven and there is a hell, and they believe that religious stuff, right? They're very committed to that. They're certain that they're correct. If you are very strongly Republican, very strongly Democratic, you believe that your side is the side that has the truth and the other side is wrong. Very committed, right? You're more likely to believe that you are correct, right? And that is the correct way to go. That's one reason. You're certain that you're correct. That's called commitment, okay? And then there's also embeddedness. Embeddedness, there's like the word bed, right? Like you're in bed with something. That has to do with the fact that the attitude reflects your self-concept, your values, your identity. It reflects who you are. It's kind of talked about like, okay, you're in bed with this, right? You know, that kind of stuff. You're really into that sort of stuff, you know, that sort of stuff. When you have embeddedness, that means that what you believe has a lot to do with who you are, right? You believe in saving the planet, whatever it is, right? That means you really believe in that green energy. You are one of these people who likes to take care of the planet, who volunteers to help clean things up. It's part of yourself. It's part of who you are. You're one of these people, right? Most people, that's not part of their self-concept. They say they believe in that, but behavior doesn't really show it. It's not really part of their self-concept. They're more like everybody else, where they'll do something if it's convenient for them. Okay. Your values, your identity, that sort of stuff. If it really describes you, then yes, that's going to be, that's called embeddedness, right? It's more likely to be, you know, who you are, and you're less likely to change, right? I'll give you an extreme example here, right? You're a priest, let's say, right? Priests don't believe in abortion. They're not pro-choice. Shouldn't put it, you know, as abortion, but being pro-choice. No way, because their whole way of life, everything they teach and everything they stand for is against that. So they're more likely to be what is called pro-life, right? Not pro-choice. From their point of view, it's just abortion. It's just taking a life, right? And they believe in that strongly. It's part of their values, their identity, all that stuff. And they're also very committed to that. They're sure that they have the correct point of view, where other people can be on the other side. Let's talk about attitude, behavior, consistency. When is your attitude and your behavior more likely to be consistent? We talked about strong attitudes, right? That's when you have a strong attitude, your behavior is more likely to be consistent with that. Okay. But how does it work? What kind of drives this? Okay. Well, there's a theory that says that attitude, behavior, consistency increases with three things. Okay. That there's three things that affect attitude, behavior, consistency. One is knowledge, another one is personal relevance, and another one is attitude accessibility. So one is knowledge. Okay. So how much knowledge do you have about that thing that reflects your attitude, right? How much knowledge do you have about it? Like, for instance, if you have like direct knowledge of something, your attitude, attitude and your behavior more likely to be consistent. Like, let's say you lived through the Great Depression, right? A time when, a fourth of Americans lost their jobs, money was scarce, and it was just hard. It was just hard to make a living. A lot of people were hungry and poor, and things got really bad. Okay, there's probably not too many of those people around. That was when was that? The 1930s, 1930. That was a long time ago. Most of those people are gone now. But let's say you lived through that, right? If you lived through that, right, then you're more likely to believe in saving money. And not only that, you're more likely to actually act on that. You're more likely to save your money and not be this, consumer, right? This materialistic consumer that just buys and buys and never saves anything. The average American has like $15,000 of credit card debt or something like that. Most people spend more money than they even have. If you live through really hard times, right, you have direct knowledge of that, you're more likely to have the attitude, right, that I need to save my money, I need to spend my money wisely, right? You're more likely to believe that, and you're more likely to do that. Almost everybody believes they should spend their money wisely, but most people do not. Their behavior is not consistent. Most people just spend money they don't have. And that's the way most people are. But if you've lived through tough times, you have direct knowledge of how it's important to save money, to live frugally, right, to make wise choices, then you're more likely to be consistent with that. If you have only indirect knowledge, like practically all of you guys, like, for instance, you've only heard of the Great Depression, you didn't really live through it, you don't know how bad it can get, then you're less likely to spend money wisely. You're less likely to, even if you believe in saving money, you're less likely to follow through with that, with your behavior. We did have a recession in 2008. That was bad, but was not as bad as the Depression. Okay, so if you have knowledge, right, you're more likely, your behavior is more likely, the more knowledge you have, the more your behavior is likely to be consistent with that attitude, right? The more you know about something, especially if you've lived through it, if you have direct experience with that, then your behavior is more likely to be consistent. If it's personally relevant to you, right? If the attitude reflects something that personally affects you, it's personally relevant, then you're more likely to have behavior that is consistent with it. Like, for instance, the gun control laws, right? You believe in gun control, let's say, or you don't, right? Let's say that you are one of these people that lives out, in a rural community, and you hunt, and it's part of your lifestyle. You like to hunt. Maybe you even get some of your food through hunting, right? When they start talking about gun control, you're going to say, hell no, right? You're going to have that attitude, and you are going to vote against it. Your attitude is going to be very consistent. Why? Because it is very relevant to you. For most people, right, they are in favor or against gun control. For most people, it's not that relevant. Most people don't own guns. Most people don't hunt. Most people don't live in these rural communities, but they may be against it. It's not that relevant to them, and they may not even vote. It's a very polarizing thing. A lot of people are against it. A lot of people are for it. Or some people, actually, there's more relevance now for a lot of people because a lot of them are hearing about all these school shootings and they're afraid for their kids and things like that. Some people have lived through school shootings, so they're very against that. They're very for gun control. But if it's relevant to you, if it affects you, then yes, your attitude is going to be more consistent with your behavior. A lot of things, not that relevant, okay? But we still have an opinion, and our behavior doesn't always match the opinion. Attitude accessibility is the other thing that affects whether we're going to act consistently with our attitude, right? With our behavior. That means how easily you can think about things, how easily it comes to mind. Okay. So what do you think about this whole thing about going green and basically that we need to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels and drive maybe more electric cars and have solar panels and things like that, right? If when you think about that, right, when you think about fossil fuels, right, if you think about corrupt oil companies, right, gouging their customers, right, and the smog and the destroying of the environment and all that stuff, right, if that's what comes to mind, then you're more likely to demand that there be an investigation. You're more likely to demand that we switch to green energy, right? Your attitudes are more likely to be consistent with your attitude about green energy is more likely to be consistent with your behavior, more likely to drive an electric car, even if they're more expensive, and they are, right? and more likely to be against big oil and stuff like that. But if when you think about, fossil fuels, you think more about jobs, and you think more about, the fact that you can drive your car and you can drive it for a long distance and it's convenient, and maybe gas is cheap where you live, that stuff, right? Then you're likely to have a pro attitude, a positive attitude toward fossil fuels, and less likely to demand that they be investigated, less likely to demand that they switch to, that they switch and become more greener, right? And develop other forms of energy, cleaner forms of energy. So all that matters: your knowledge, your personal relevance, your attitude, the attitude accessibility. That means how easily the thing comes to mind, right? The attitude. Here's another theory that tries to explain when our attitudes and our behavior will be consistent. This one actually has a name. It's called the theory. Well, the other one does too. I just didn't mention it. But anyway, this one's called the theory. These are just things that affect attitude behavior consistency. And here's a theory that tries to, the whole theory tries to explain how it works. Okay, the theory of planned behavior says that the best predictor of behavior, the best predictor of what you're going to do is your behavioral intention, which is influenced by your attitude, the subjective norms, and the perceived control, which I'll talk about in a moment. It says that the best predictor of your behavior is your behavioral intention. So the best predictor of what you're going to do is what you intend to do. That sounds silly, right? But what you intend to do, and here's the important part, is affected by your attitude, the subjective norms, and the perceived control. So what you intend to do is affected by your attitude, right? What's your attitude toward that thing, right? The evaluation of the specific behavior. How do you feel about that, okay? So that's one thing that affects whether it's going to affect your intention, okay? So I have an example here. Maybe you would like to buy an expensive car, right? So you have a positive attitude toward an expensive car. Maybe you want a luxury car, an expensive car, right? Not that regular $20,000, $25,000 car. No, you want one of these $60,000 cars, an $80,000 car, or something like that, an expensive car. They get much more expensive than that. Some cars cost millions, by the way. But let's say you have that attitude. You like expensive cars. Okay, that's your attitude. So, okay, you have the attitude, and now the subjective norm. Another thing that matters for you to actually go through with the behavior of buying an expensive car is whether others approve of the behavior. Do others have expensive cars? Do your neighbors buy expensive cars? Do you see them around you? That's the norm, right? If you see that a lot of people are driving expensive cars, then you're more likely to buy an expensive car. So you have the attitude, you also have the subjective norms, right? You like expensive cars, that's the attitude. The subjective norm lines up, your neighbors, people around you drive expensive cars. And then you need the third thing to go through with the behavior. You need the perceived control. That refers to the difficulty of the behavior. In other words, can you perform the behavior? Can you afford the expensive car? Can you buy one? Do you make enough money to afford one? If all those things line up, you have the positive attitude, people around you approve of it, right? They do the same thing, and you can afford it, or you can perform the behavior. According to the theory of planned behavior, you will have then the intention, right? And then that will lead to the behavior. So you like expensive cars, people around you buy expensive cars, they drive expensive cars, you can afford an expensive car. The theory says you're going to buy an expensive car. That's what the theory says. These three things are what affect attitude behavior consistency. If the attitude isn't there, then the behavior is not going to follow. If the subjective norm isn't there, the behavior is not going to follow, right? People around you don't like expensive cars. They don't buy expensive cars. Probably neither will you. Okay? Perceived control, you can afford it. Well, you're not going to do it. So here it is, for those of you who are more visual, the theory of planned behavior, what it says. So the attitude, the subjective norm, the behavioral control, right? The perceived behavioral control, right? Perceived means that you think you can afford it, right? You think you can do it, that kind of stuff. Or you think you cannot do it. Maybe you can do it, but you think you cannot, and you still won't do it. If you think you can't, you won't. But maybe you can. So it's perceived. It's what you think that matters. So the attitude, I would like to buy an expensive car, or I like expensive cars, right? And then my neighbors drive expensive cars, yes. and then I can afford an expensive car. That leads to the intention. I intend to buy an expensive car, right? And then that leads to the behavior. I will buy an expensive car. Okay, that is what the theory says. That's how it works. I'll give you my personal example. I have a positive attitude towards something. Hey, I want a Tesla. I like that car. I would love a Tesla, right? Yes, I'm into that stuff, right? Into the future, green energy, right? Electric cars. Never mind the stuff where you can argue with me about that it still pollutes or whatever stuff. But never mind that, right? I like that car. I believe in the mission. I believe in what it does, right? I have a positive attitude with that. I like Tesla. Okay. Subjective norm. My neighbors drive expensive cars. Do they drive Teslas? Not expensive cars. In this case, Teslas. Do they drive Teslas? I see some here and there. Not that many. So we're iffy on that, okay? The perceived behavior control, can I afford an expensive car? Can I afford that Tesla? Yeah, I can afford it, right? That would lead to the intention, and then that means I would buy a Tesla. I do plan to buy one. It's just a matter of when. I can afford one right now. The thing is, here's the thing. What is really stopping me? According to the theory, it's the subjective norm. According to the theory, I don't see them that much. I do see them here and there. But that probably needs to be stronger. If I lived in a place like La Cañada, because sometimes I go to Descanso Gardens, I take my kids there and we walk around the gardens over there. That's an expensive area. I see a lot of Teslas there. If I lived there, I would probably already have one, because my neighbors would have one and people would have them. And I tell them that I want one, and they would tell me, well, what's stopping you? Can you afford it? Like, yeah. Well, where the hell would you buy one? And I probably would have bought one already, but I haven't yet. I'm trying to be rational, trying to be careful, trying to be frugal. It's a lot of money. Maybe I'll buy the $25,000 one that will come up in a few years, probably more like 3 years, but I will buy one eventually. But yeah, according to the theory, there's something stopping me here. Probably the subjective norm. When it gets to the point that Teslas are just everywhere, and eventually they will be, and if you invested in the company, you probably made a lot of money, although right now the stock is going down, then where was I going with this, right? Then you would probably buy one, right? When there's a bunch of them out there, and there are more in California and other states, they sell more in California. When they're everywhere, a lot more people will buy them, and eventually they will sell millions and millions of cars. They only sold 500,000 last year. They're probably going to sell about 1 million this year, and then they'll probably go up from there. And it's the future, and that's what I believe. I'm for this. Okay, give you my own personal example there, but it can really apply to anything you intend, anything that has to do with an attitude and a behavior. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about attitude change, right? Let's talk about attitude change. How do you change people's attitude, or how easy is it, or how hard is it? We're going to talk about things related to that. And we need to talk first about something known as cognitive dissonance theory. This is going to be a little bit harder to understand, but I'm going to explain it really well, okay? So I'm going to give you plenty of examples. Here's the thing. This theory tells us about attitude change, okay? So cognitive dissonance theory basically says, and I try to put it very briefly here because it's a kind of complex, right? It says that inconsistent cognitions, inconsistent attitudes, inconsistent beliefs, behaviors, etc. When our attitudes, our cognitions, our thoughts, when they're inconsistent, that creates an unpleasant feeling. It creates an unpleasant physiological arousals or psychological arousal that we are motivated to reduce. It's also physiological. So what the theory says is that when our thoughts are inconsistent, that creates an unpleasant feeling that we want to get rid of. That's what the theory says. That's the way that's the most plain way to say that. When we have inconsistent thoughts, that creates an unpleasant feeling, and we want to get rid of that feeling. Okay? So let's say you believe in God, but then you don't go to church. If you think about that, those two things are inconsistent. And if you think about that, you might feel a little bit uncomfortable. You might feel a little bit guilty. Produces this bad feeling. And maybe you want to get rid of that bad feeling. So how do you get rid of it? You can stop thinking about it, right? That's one thing you can do, and not be aware of the inconsistency. That's a way that we can deal with this stuff. We're all full of inconsistencies, and a lot of times they don't bother us because we're not thinking about them. But when somebody points them out and really, kind of drives home that point, it could bother us. I'll give you another one. Let's say you believe, I mean, you want to take care of your health, let's say, right? You believe in being healthy. That's your attitude, right? And then your behavior is you smoke. Those two things don't match. Those two things are inconsistent. You want to take care of your health, but you smoke. And I know some of you smoke. You probably do, some of you. And now that I've reminded you of that, you probably feel bad, right? Right? You smoke. There's the thought. You smoke. I mean, you like you want to take care of your health, but you also smoke. And you know that smoking is bad for you. And you know that it's going to shorten your life. Those two things don't match. And therefore, you feel bad. You feel uncomfortable. That's how cognitive dissonance theory works. Okay? Another example, you love someone, but they cheated on you. You are going to feel awful. Okay? That's that unpleasant feeling. You're going to want to get rid of that feeling. And we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. That has to do with attitude change. The dissonance results to the extent that cognitions are important. The unpleasant feeling is there to the extent that these thoughts matter. Like there could be one like, I like ice cream. That's one thought. I'm not eating ice cream. That's another thought. That's inconsistent, but it doesn't matter that much. I don't care about it that much, so I don't feel that bad. Okay? I'm not really that crazy about it, believe it or not. But let's put it this way. Okay, I love Thai food, right? I love Thai food. I haven't had Thai food in a while. That's my other thought, right? I feel a little bit unpleasant, right? I want some damn Thai food, right? I have this psychological arousal, or even some physiological arousal, right? I want some of this food, right? That's an unpleasant feeling, right? I like Thai food. I'm not eating Thai food. I haven't had it in a while. So that creates an unpleasant feeling. It's not that important, but I'm giving you examples that have to do with things that are not so important. If it's not so important, you're not going to feel too bad. The inconsistency doesn't matter that much. But if it's something very important to you, and there's an inconsistency there, like you love someone and they cheated on you and you really love that person, then it's going to make you feel really awful. You're going to have a lot of dissonance. So let me tell you about an experiment that was done by Fessinger and Carl Smith in 1959. Yes, this theory is very old, and Fessinger is the author of the theory. He's the one who originally proposed the theory. It's a very important theory. So they did this experiment. Carl Smith was his graduate student, went on to have his own career. But I'm going to explain how cognitive dissonance works. Okay, so they did this experiment where students first performed a boring task. Students were doing something very boring. Actually, it was the participants in their study. Their job was to do something very boring. Turning pegs in holes. A peg is just maybe like a stick or something. Think of it that way. And you have to put it in a hole and you have to turn it and just keep turning it. It's really boring, really stupid, right? It's just, you're just turning this little stick in a hole. Boring, okay? That's what they had to do, the participants. Then they were asked to tell another student. It was actually interesting. They were asked to lie to another student. And they were either paid $1 to lie or $20 to lie. Okay? Later on, the students were asked about their attitude toward the boring task. They were asked about what they thought about, turning that stick or that peg in that hole. They were asked what they thought about the task, okay? Those that got $1 saw it as more enjoyable. Those that only were paid $1 say it's actually not that bad. And those that received $20, they didn't change their attitudes at all. They said, no, this thing sucks, it's boring. They were paid $20 to lie. The other people were paid $1 lie. The people who were paid $1 to lie, they said, this is not that bad. Okay, the people who were paid $20, they said, no, this is bad. This is boring. Why is that? What's going on here? Let me explain this. Okay, why? Dissonance theory explains it. The ones that got $20, the ones who were paid $20 to lie, they had adequate justification for misleading another student. In other words, they're getting paid $20 to lie. So they don't feel that bad about lying. They're getting paid $20 to lie, and they basically, they didn't feel that bad about it. Okay, they had adequate justification. Okay, those that were paid $1, They had insufficient justification. And that causes dissonance. Okay? Those that were given $1 to lie, right? Those are the ones that felt bad. It's like basic saying, you got to lie to this person. And by the way, you're just going to have to do it. We're not really going to reward you for it. We're going to give you $1, okay? In other words, just lie to them, okay? That causes dissonance. And that bad feeling is what causes the change in attitude, right? That dissonance is what causes the changing of beliefs about the task, okay? So changing beliefs about the task was reduced the cognitive discomfort. Let me explain that, okay? If you change you got $1 to lie to someone, you felt bad about that because you're just lying for no reason, okay? You're just lying. In order to feel better, what you had to do, according to the authors, is that you had to change your belief about the task and actually say, you know what, it's not that bad. All right? And that made you feel better. The dissonance, the bad feeling, leads to a change in attitude. It leads to a change. Okay? Let me explain this further. Okay? Those that were paid $20, those that were in the adequate justification condition. Here's the way the thoughts work. Thought 1, I am misleading somebody about a boring task. Thought 1, I am lying to someone. Thought number 2, I'm being paid $20. Is there dissonance? Not really. I'm lying to someone, but hey, I'm getting $20. It's worth it. Okay? So not much dissonance there. Thought 1 and 2, not really consistent. Okay? So there's no attitude change. They don't feel bad and they don't change their attitude. They still think the task is boring and that it sucks. Sure, they lied to somebody about it, but they don't feel bad about it because they got $20. Here's a better way to think about this so you understand this. It's like when you have a really tough job. You have a very difficult job, right? Your job, it sucks, let's say. I mean, let's not put it that way. You have a difficult job, right? You work really hard. But they pay you a bunch of money. Do you hate your job? No, you don't feel bad about it. You don't think your job sucks, right? I mean, actually, you don't feel bad about it. I'll put it that way. You can still think the job is hard and maybe that it sucks, but the fact that they pay you a lot, you don't feel bad about it. So you don't have to basically, you don't feel bad about it, and therefore you don't have to quit your job, so to speak. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to change your behavior. I'm getting ahead of myself. This can lead to a change in behavior. But think about it this way, right? You have a very tough job, you work really hard, and you get paid lots of money. You should not feel bad about that. That shouldn't arouse any dissonance. Sure, you work really hard, but you also get paid lots of money. Okay, so no dissonance there. There's no attitude change. But think about this situation. When you have an insufficient justification condition, when you basically have to lie to someone, mislead somebody about a boring task and tell them it's interesting, you have to lie to someone and you get $1 for it. In other words, you're doing something you don't like and you're getting paid almost nothing for it. That should arouse dissonance. Dissonance is high. Those thoughts are inconsistent. I'm lying to someone and I'm doing it for nothing. I'm lying to someone. I'm doing something I don't want to do. I'm lying and I'm doing it for nothing. So that creates dissonance. Dissonance is high. You get that uncomfortable feeling, and then that leads to attitude change. That comfortable feeling, that uncomfortable feeling, that bad feeling, in order for you to feel better, you need to do something. One thing you can do, the easiest thing to do, is to change your attitude. So thought 1 changes to, the task is not that boring. It's not that bad. You feel bad about lying to someone, right? You got paid $1, right? How can you stop feeling bad? You say, well, it's actually not that bad. And there, you don't feel so bad anymore. You change your attitude. And then what happens after that is now you got paid $1 and you didn't really lie. It's not that bad now. You think it's not that bad. So you change your attitude, say, well, you know what? I didn't really lie. It's actually not that bad. That kind of thing. Think of it this way. Okay, here's an easy way to understand this. Let's say you have a very hard job, very tough job, right? You work really hard and they don't pay you well. They pay you really badly. When you have a job that's really hard, and they hardly pay you anything, you feel awful, okay? Dissonance is high, like I'm working my ass off and they're paying me nothing, right? That is dissonance. You feel awful about that. That will lead to a change. Here's what you can do. You can change your attitude about your job and say, well, at least I have a job, right? A lot of people don't have a job, so you're changing your attitude about it. Or actually, my job's not that bad. Or another thing you can do that's harder to do is you can quit and find a better job. That's what cognitive dissonance says. When you have inconsistent thoughts, inconsistent beliefs, or your attitude, your thought, and your behavior don't match, that creates an uncomfortable feeling. And that uncomfortable feeling, that bad feeling, can motivate you to change. You can change your attitude or you can change your behavior. And it's much easier to just change the attitude. It's much harder to quit the job and be without a job for a while. But a lot of people also quit the job. Okay. Let's keep going. Here's the thing. Other things that matter, that affect cognitive consistency, other things that affect whether, things are going to change. One of those things is arousal. Cooper, Zana, and Taves in 1978, this theory is very old, okay? A lot of research is old here. They gave participants a tranquilizer so that they didn't feel so bad. And people who got a tranquilizer did not experience much dissonance. They didn't really have much arousal. So they didn't change their opinions. Here's the thing. You can have inconsistent cognitions, inconsistent thoughts that can make you feel very unpleasant. But if you take a tranquilizer, that reduces your physiological arousal. Okay? In other words, you don't feel so bad anymore. It's like you have a beer and you feel better. Smoke some weed, you feel better. You don't feel so bad anymore. And therefore, you don't have to change. It's a way to cope. You have a job where you work really hard, right? They hardly pay you anything. You feel awful about that. You have a lot of dissonance. You come home, you drink some beer, and you feel better. It gets rid of the bad feeling. Smoke some weed, whatever it is. That's what people do to cope. Hey, you're married, right? And your wife doesn't love you. And you care about her, right? You feel awful. That's inconsistent. So what do? Right? You try to reduce your arousal somehow. You try to get rid of that negative feeling somehow, right? What do? I go jogging and I feel better. I go out, outside. I go take a hike. I jog. I go out into the wilderness. That makes me feel a lot better. Reduce that arousal. Reduce that negative feeling. And then I can keep coping, right? I can keep staying here, right? Another thing I can do that's very hard to do is to just get the hell out of here, right? And then my thoughts won't be inconsistent anymore. Now my thought will be, my wife doesn't love me and I'm not with this person anymore. That's not inconsistent. So I'll get rid of the arousal by changing my behavior as well. But I'm here, I have kids. I actually do care about my wife. I do love my kids and I do anything for them. And I'm sticking around and I'm coping as best I can, right? Some people drink, some people cheat. I jog, I exercise. That's how I cope. And some days are better than others, okay? But yes, the more arousal you have, the worse the feeling, the more you're going to be bothered by it, the more likely you are to change. Maybe your behavior or maybe your attitude. Okay. Another thing that matters is salience. Salience has to do with the extent to which it easily comes to mind, the extent to which it's noticeable. Inconsistent thoughts and behaviors can be held without dissonance if we're not that aware of them. Maybe you have inconsistent thoughts, like maybe you believe in God, but you don't go to church. But you're not thinking about that. It's not salient. Most of the time you don't think about that. So it doesn't bother you. Or like I said, you like ice cream, but you're not eating ice cream, but you usually don't think about ice cream. It's not that salient. So it doesn't bother you. Most of the time, I'm not thinking about food, I'm not thinking about Thai food. I love Thai food. I haven't had it in a while. I don't feel that bad about it. It's not that salient because I'm not really thinking about it. To the extent to which things are in your mind, they are present at the forefront, right? That it really is on your mind, right? You're concerned about it. Then that creates more of a physiological arousal, right? More of a negative feeling, a stronger one, and that's more likely to produce change, whether it's the attitude or the behavior. By the way, over here where it says dissonance theory, where it says the inconsistent attitudes produce psychological arousal, I believe that should say physiological arousal, because it really is a negative feeling, right? It really is physiological. It's also psychological, but I wonder if the theory, if that's just a typo. I have to look back at the theory, but it works either way, whether it's psychological or physiological, but it really is physiological. You really are bothered physically. You want to get rid of that bad feeling, you can change your attitude, you can change your behavior when things don't match. Let's talk about persuasion now, right? That was all about attitudes, but persuasion is also related to attitudes, because sometimes what people want to persuade you, what they're trying to change is your attitude. They want to persuade you, right? Hey, buy this car, or invest your money here, or people are telling you, right? These things happen all the time, okay? Persuasion, by the way, to define it, is a change in private attitude or belief as a result of receiving a message. Somebody tells you something, or you see something on TV, or you hear about something. That's a message, and they're trying to persuade you, right? These things happen all the time on TV, right? Hey, buy this, buy that, eat here, eat there, go to this website. Newspapers, who reads newspapers anymore, right? But yeah, there used to be newspapers. They're still around, magazines, that kind of stuff. Ads on billboards, on the internet. They're trying to persuade you, buy this, click here, invest your money here, right? Join this group, right? That kind of stuff. It happens every day, even in person as well. People tell you, hey, let's go out to eat. Hey, let's do this, right? Hey, let's go out, let's date, right? Let's do this, right? You could imagine the kind of things they tell you, right? Especially when it comes to dating, right? People are trying to convince you all the time. Eat here, do this, do that, have sex with this person, right? Dump this person, be with this other one, right? Listen to this type of music, buy this, buy that. It happens all the time. Every single day, we're bombarded with messages, sometimes from people, often from ads, from TV, from music. And are you going to be persuaded? Are you going to change your attitude, or are you going to change your behavior, right? That is persuasion. We're subject to this every single day. People are trying to persuade us. Okay. There are theories of persuasion to try to explain how this works. So we're going to go over those. The first one we're going to talk about is called the cognitive response model. The cognitive response model says that after receiving a message, and I have an example for you there, that is still relevant and will probably still be relevant in the future, because he's going to run again. After receiving a message, right, let's say vote for Trump, right? Persuasion is affected by these three things, according to the theory. The amount of self-talk generated, okay? Whether the self-talk supports the message, and the confidence in the self-talk, okay? Those three things. Self-talk is the thoughts that come up. Sometimes maybe you talk to yourself out loud. Sometimes it's just in your head, but that's the self-talk. And then do those thoughts. Does that self-talk support the message? And how confident are you in those thoughts or in that message? So here's an example for you guys, right? Oh, wait, the example. Okay, actually, let me give you the example. It's actually not written out, but let me give you the example, right? The messages, or the persuasive messages, right? What they tell you is, hey, vote for Trump, right? How much self-talk is generated, right? What are the thoughts that come up? Are they for or are they against Trump? Okay, and does it support the message? Are they for or against Trump, right? And also, how confident are you in those thoughts that come up? How confident are you that that is correct? That's what the theory says. So sometimes the self-talk that is generated sometimes produces counter arguments. Sometimes when they tell you a message like, hey, vote for Trump, sometimes the thoughts that come up are totally against the argument. Those are called counter arguments, right? Arguments that challenge and oppose other arguments. So after hearing vote for Trump, you remember, the COVID pandemic, which he completely ignored and minimized, right? You remember, the whole thing about saying that the election is rigged, and the storming of the Capitol, all this nonsense, right? If that's what comes up when you hear the message, then those are called counter arguments. Those are arguments. That's self-talk. It does not support the message. And if you're confident in that, you're going to say, hey, screw you. I'm not voting for that guy. I'm voting for the other guy, right? But yes, those are called counter arguments. That's what that theory says. That's basically, that's what it says about persuasion, right? That after receiving a message, you have some thoughts, self-talk, right? And then whether it supports the message or not, and then how confident are you? That is what will then produce persuasion or no persuasion, or maybe the exact opposite, okay? That's what it says. Now, here's another theory for you guys that is a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. The dual process model of persuasion. It says that attitude change occurs in two ways. In other words, there's two ways you can be persuaded, okay? One is called the central route, and the other one is called the peripheral route. If you took my Psych 101 class, I mentioned this. It's just now we're going to go into more detail. The central route to persuasion is when you think carefully about the message. So when you get a message, if you think carefully about it, and that's how you are persuaded, then you're being persuaded via the central route. Think about it this way. It's like you're using the central nervous system. You're using your brain. The biggest part of the central nervous system is the brain, right? That's when you use your brain, the central route. But you can also be persuaded via the peripheral route, when you are persuaded by the appearance, the mood, the number of arguments. Peripheral means the outside. So when you're persuaded via the peripheral route, you're focusing on the stuff that really doesn't matter that much. The shallow stuff, the appearance, the mood, right? That kind of stuff. It's when you're not using your brain, okay? That's the peripheral route. You're easily going along by things that don't matter. You're going along with the shallow stuff. And that's why you are voting for that person, you know, because they look like a real American, they sound like a real American, that kind of stuff. Or that's why you're buying that car because, hey, it looks good, right? It's shiny, right? It's popular, that kind of stuff, right? You're not really using your brain there. Central route is when you care deeply about things and you think deeply about the message, and then you are persuaded. Here's the thing, the central route, right? When you use your brain, right? When you actually think about something, it depends on motivation, okay? In other words, how much do you care about the message? And another thing, and what really affects motivation, is whether it's relevant. Does it matter to you? Does it matter who you vote for? Does it matter if you buy a car? Whatever they're trying to persuade you, right? Does it really matter to you? If it doesn't matter, you're not going to have the motivation, and you probably won't really be persuaded, okay? Motivation is also affected by need for cognition. Need for cognition, that's a personality characteristic. It's the tendency to enjoy and engage in deep thought. There are people who just love to think. They like to figure things out, right? There are people like that. They're usually people who are smarter, by the way, and they enjoy thinking about things. It's easier for them to think about things, okay? Those people are more likely to use their brains when considering the message. If they are persuaded, it's because they've thought about it, okay? And ability also matters, right? If you're intelligent, you have a long attention span, right? If it's easy for you to think about the message, if it's easy for you to understand it, right? If you have a lot of knowledge, right? If you're intelligent, then you're more likely to use the brain, right? More likely to think intelligently and then make a decision based on that. So you're more likely to be persuaded via the peripheral route. What's interesting, however, is when you are persuaded via the peripheral route, okay? The other one was the central route. In case I misspoke, it was the central route. The peripheral route depends on heuristic processing, right? It's when you're persuaded by taking shortcuts. So, hey, should you, let's say buy that product? There's an expert on TV telling you, hey, this product really works. Maybe it's a doctor telling you about some weight loss supplement or something like that, right? You go along with them because, hey, it's an expert, it's a doctor. So you agree and you buy that product, right? You buy that diet pill. That's also called a logical appeal, right? When you're going along with what experts say, okay? You're really taking a shortcut. You're not thinking for yourself. You're just going along with experts. Or the majority opinion is correct. So they show you a commercial for a car, right? And they say, hey, it's the #1 selling car in America. In other words, that's consensus. People agree. So you're more likely to basically agree as well. Say, hey, the #1 selling car. Yeah, I'm getting that car, right? You're going to be persuaded in that way, right? That's a shortcut as well. Or long messages are valid. When you are persuaded by a long message, they give you this long infomercial, this long commercial, basically. It takes like an hour. They're trying to sell you that what do they call that? Nutra grain thing, or it used to be the magic bullet, and then they sold a bunch of those, and that went out of, eventually they stopped selling that. Now they have the Nutra bullet, I think they call it. It's the same freaking thing, okay? Just so you know. It's another blender, but they're calling it, oh, this magical thing. And they're telling you, oh, look, it can do this, it can do that. You can enjoy nachos, you can make smoothies. They have this big, long commercial, this big, long message. And you say, hey, man, well, I guess I should buy one, right? You're taking a shortcut again. There's a lot of reasons for you to buy that, so you go along with it. But you're not thinking, okay? You're just going along with, whatever. You're just taking a shortcut. You're not using your brain. And that's exactly what those commercials are trying to do most of the time. When you see commercials on TV, they are almost always trying to persuade you through the peripheral route, right? Oh, look, you can do this, you can do that, right? There's an expert there, there's a doctor there, right? It's the #1 selling car, #1 selling truck. They use attractive people, sexy people, popular people, celebrities. In other words, hey, man, don't think about this, just go with it. That is the peripheral route. You're not thinking. You're making a very quick decision based on stupidity, to tell you the truth, okay? You're not thinking for yourself, okay? And that is the way they get you with these ads most of the time. Rarely do they ever resort to actually your intelligence. Rarely do they ever want you to think about the message carefully, because if you did, you probably wouldn't be buying that damn car or that burger or whatever the hell it is. They're usually trying to sell you crap that you don't need, okay? Here's the way it looks for those of you who are more visually. So you have the message, okay? And then there are audience factors, right? Things about the person. So you're high in motivation. So we're looking at the top first, right? High in motivation, high in ability, right? So you care about the message, you're intelligent, you can really think about it. That's more likely to lead to central processing, where you really think about it. And when you make a decision, if you are persuaded in that way, that's more likely to lead to lasting change that resists fading and counter arguments. So if you buy a car, let's say, right, you're really motivated, right, to think about the message, right? You really want to think about it. You're very intelligent and you know about cars. You've studied them, let's say, you know about all sorts of things, right? You've done your research, so to speak. You're more likely to engage in central processing, right, where you think carefully about the message, and you're more likely to buy a car that you're not going to regret buying, okay? But if you get a message and you are low in motivation or ability, they want you to buy a certain car, but you're low in motivation. You don't really want to think about it that hard, right? Low in ability, it's hard for you to think. You're just, let's say you're not that bright. Your memory isn't that good. You don't know that much stuff. It's hard for you to read stuff. It's hard for you to do the research, right? You don't want to do that. So that's more likely to lead to peripheral processing, where you're more likely to go with something that looks cool, something that's popular, that kind of stuff. And you're likely to buy a car, right? That's likely to lead to the kind of persuasion that is temporary and susceptible to fading and counter arguments. So in other words, you're more likely to buy a car that you're going to regret buying later on. Yeah, it looked good, but it turns out to be a piece of crap that breaks down all the time. That's not reliable. Or maybe it looks cool, but the gas mileage is awful, and it's really killing you with gas. You're spending a ton of money, or the insurance is really high. That's what happens. You're going to regret it. Okay, that's what the theory says. Let's see what's next. Okay, we will stop there and we'll finish the other half next time. So let me stop this recording.